Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Candy Forecast Cost to Completion. My name is Jagishan. I'm a senior technical consultant here at the CCS Gulf office in Dubai. It's my pleasure to present this webinar to you. Today, I will be demonstrating to you how to use Candy's functionality of forecasting cost to completion. Due to the large number of people logged into this webinar, we will not be able to answer any questions during the webinar. However, please submit your questions during the session with the provided function on the screen. At the end of the webinar, we'll collate these questions and send the answers to everyone that registered for the webinar. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and you will receive a link to download it. There is a webinar once a month on various Candy topics. Should you not be able to attend the webinar at the given time frame, then please still register for the webinar, as this will entitle you to receive a recorded copy of the webinar by email. Let's get started. The cost and allowable application in Candy is used to monitor the financial performance of a project. The current allowable generated by Candy is compared with the current cost as captured in the accounting system like BillSmart. While it is important to understand where a project stands financially at any point in time, it is more important to have the ability to forecast the financial status at completion. The cost and allowable module provides all the tools necessary to achieve these goals and thus assist the project team to make value decisions to maximize the profitability of a project. To summarize, the cost and allowable module is used to analyze to-date allowable versus to-date cost, remaining allowable versus remaining cost, and at completion allowable versus at completion cost. In this webinar, we will see how the remaining cost can be forecasted using the tools available in Candy. So today, we will be covering the following topics, starting with Candy cost and allowable comparison. Then we'll see cost to completion or remaining cost. Then cost to complete adjustments using cost rate of resources. Cost to complete adjustments using cost worksheets. And then cost to complete adjustments using Subcontract Manager. Then we'll move on to cost at completion. And then cost to complete or cost at completion in earned value graph. And then finally, we'll do some analysis using cost rates. So let's go to the first topic, which is Candy cost and allowable comparison. For the purpose of this webinar, in Candy, I have got a job which has ended the post-contract stage. So the estimating team has priced the job and the job has been awarded. So we have established a budget for the job. I also set up the baseline for this job to get the end value curve. And then I have the first valuation of the job where I updated the progress against the bill item. And I also imported the cost from BillSmart for this job. So we'll start this webinar with the first valuation of this job. I'll enter the first valuation job. So as I mentioned, this job has progressed in the post-contract stage. And I've updated the valuations from the valuations module. I'll open up the valuation bill. And as you can see, against the initial earthwork items, I have updated the actual quantity. So I have progressed the clear site and the excavation in bulk. And this progress or the actual quantity that I have entered will generate the allowables for the month or the to-date allowables, which we can see in the cost and allowable module. So I'll go into the Cost and Allowable module. From the Cost and Allowable module, I'll open the Cost and Allowable Documents Manager. And within the Cost and Allowable Document Manager, I'll open up the document 1.1, which is Cost and Allowable by Period. In this document, the job is summarized into the task code or the activity code, and also the cost code or the accounting ledger code. And it is divided into 3 periods. One is to date, then the remaining, and then at completion. And each of these periods are further divided into 3. First one is the allowable or the budget, then the cost, and then the variance. So for today, we'll have the to date allowable, to date cost, and the to date variance. Similarly, for the remaining, we'll have the remaining allowable, remaining cost, and the remaining variance. And finally, at completion, we'll have the at completion allowable, at completion cost, and the variance at completion. First, we'll see what are the terminology used in this document. So I'll first explain the terminology. So allowable to date is calculated based on actual quantity multiplied by the net rate. The net rate is the budgeted rate that you fixed for this job, and the actual quantity is the quantity that were entered in the valuation as progress quantity. So allowables to date is actual quantity into net rate. Then cost to date is the imported cost to date from BillSmart or other accounting packages. And variance to date is allowable to date minus cost to date. Next, allowable remaining is calculated based on remaining quantity multiplied by the net rate. The remaining quantity is calculated based on the final quantity minus actual quantity. So allowable remaining is based on remaining quantity into a net rate or the budgeted rate, and then cost remaining is calculated based on remaining quantity into cost rate, and then variance remaining is the difference between allowable and the cost. So in this case, it is difference between allowable remaining and cost remaining. Next is allowable at completion, which is calculated based on final quantity multiplied by the net rate, and cost at completion is cost to date plus cost remaining, and finally variance at completion is the difference between allowable at completion and cost at completion. This webinar will focus on forecasting the cost remaining and cost at completion. The cost to date has already been handled in a separate webinar previously. If you need to get the recording of any previous webinars, please contact the local CCS office. The link will also be posted in our new website very soon. Going to the next topic, which is cost to completion or remaining cost. As I mentioned in my introduction, the cost and allowable application in Candy is used to monitor the financial performance of a project. As seen on this job, while there are variances between the allowable and cost for the to date period, there are no variance forecast in the remaining work to completion. But practically, there will be many factors that will affect the remaining cost or the cost to complete, and subsequently the cost at completion. Candy has the tools to analyze the future cost variances also. The future cost of a project can be influenced by many factors. Few of them are listed below. It could be a change in the rate of a resource, or a change in the production outputs as used in the original worksheets, or a change in the amount of waste allowed by the estimator, or the necessity to employ another or same subcontractor with rates that differ from the allowable rates. In Candy, an accurate financial forecast of cost to completion can be achieved by making use of the following: cost rates or future resource rate adjustment, cost worksheets, and subcontract manager. So let's go to the first point, which is cost to complete adjustment using cost rate of resources. It is very much practical that during a project, the price of resources will change. To analyze the effect of these resource price changes on the cost to completion, the resource cost rate function can be used. For updating the cost rates, we can go to the Cost and Allowable Document Manager and choose document 7.1, which is resource cost rates to completion. Opening up the document 7.1, resource cost rate to completion. I have customized this the default document by adding the columns 6.9 and 6.12. So 6.9 is the remaining quantity net usage and 6.12 is the remaining quantity cost usage. In this document, resource cost rate to completion, you can see that in addition to the resource final rate, there is also a resource cost rate column. This cost rate column can be used to update the actual or expected procured rates based on which the remaining quantity cost amount will be calculated. Do note that the default setting will be to use the final rate when no cost rate is updated. So in this resource list, let's choose a particular resource. So I'll go to a material related resource. Within the material, let me go to concrete materials and choose cement. Let's take the case of OPC bulk 50 kg cement bag with a resource code of 51311. For the resource OPC bulk 50 kg, the budgeted rate is 37.913 per bag of cement. Let's assume that this resource has become expensive and the current procured rate is 40 per bag. This means that for procuring cement for the remaining quantity of works, we'll have to spend 40, obviously resulting in higher cost for the remaining works. This scenario can be reflected in Candy Cost and Allowable by adjusting the resource cost rates. As I mentioned earlier, by default, the final rate will be reflected in the cost rate unless the user adjusts it with the cost rate. So let me adjust the cost rate of OPC bulk cement as 40 instead of 37.913. Do note that the updating of rate should only be done in the cost rate column and not in the final rate column. Also, the cost rates need to be adjusted only for the simple resources and not for complex resources. Upon updating the cost rates, you can see that the remaining quantity cost amount for the resource OPC bulk cement has become 627013.81, whereas the budget for the remaining quantity is only 594297.40. This is of course a negative scenario where the resources become expensive, but this tool can also be used for a positive scenario where the resource becomes cheaper, resulting in savings or reduction in forecast cost to completion. Also, in this example, we have assumed that the entire remaining quantity of 15,675 bags of cement will be procured at the rate of 40. But if you are aware that the rates will be fluctuating, then we'll have to use an average rate for updating the cost rates. Now let's see the effect of this cost rate update on the forecast cost to completion. So I'll close this resource cost rate to completion document and let me open up the document 1.1, which is cost and allowable by period. Now as you can see, the remaining allowable remains same as 6149890, but the remaining cost has increased to 6182607, resulting in a remaining variance of minus 32716. When we drill down on the activities, we can see that this variance is caused in the cost code of cement within the concrete activity. So we can see that for the concrete blinding and the concrete foundation activities against the cost code of cement, the variance is reflected in the remaining period. Subsequently, the cost at completion is also updated as it is calculated based on cost to date plus remaining cost. It will be impractical to update the cost rate for all the resources. Hence, a more practical approach in updating the cost rate of resources is to apply the 80-20 rule and select only the major resources in terms of value. To demonstrate this, let me go back to the resource related document 7.1, which is resource cost rate to completion. First, I will apply a filter to display only the simple resources. So within this document 7.1, I will go to view, filter, and choose resources that are symbols, which will keep only the simple resources in this document. Next, I will do a sort based on the remaining quantity amount in the descending order of the value to see the major resources at the top. So I'll select the remaining quantity amount, then I'll go to sort in descending, which sorts the resources in the descending order of the value, which will display the major resources in terms of value at the top. So as you can see, in this resource list, the major resource is OPC bulk 50 kg in terms of value, where we have done the cost rate adjustment of the 40 per bag. So it is more practical to apply or update the cost rates for the major resources which are higher in terms of value rather than concentrating on the low valued items, whose effect will be very small compared to the effect of the major resources on the cost to completion. Let's move on to the next topic, which is cost to complete adjustments using cost worksheets. Apart from the cost rate of resources that can change during the lifespan of a project, the production outputs used for the original estimate might also need adjustments to reflect the current conditions on site, and this will influence the future cost. These adjustments can be done in the cost worksheets. So for seeing the cost worksheet, let me go to the cost and allowable document manager, and let me choose document 6.1, which is bill with cost rate for cost worksheet adjustments. For the purpose of this webinar, I have customized this document to keep the relevant columns for this webinar. So I have renamed it as 6.1a. So I'll open up the customize document. In this document, you can see that in addition to the net rate, which is a budgeted rate, there is also a cost rate column. So the cost rate column can be used to update the actual productivities, usages, etc., based on which the remaining quantity cost amount will be calculated. Like we access the price code net worksheet from the net rate, you can also double click on the cost rate column to open up the cost worksheet. Or you can also open up the net worksheet and then flip to the cost worksheet. So I'll choose the first item, clearance strip side. When I double click on the net rate, the net worksheet will open up, and then if you go to view, I'll get an option to flip to cost worksheet, and if I click on flip to cost worksheet, it will open up the cost worksheet of this item. In the latest versions of Candy, we have also introduced an option of opening both the net and the cost worksheets together. This option can be accessed by clicking on the up arrow which is next to the net worksheet tab at the bottom of this document. So if I click on the up arrow, I'll get three options. The first one is to display only the net worksheet, the second one to display the cost worksheet, and the third option is to display both net and the cost worksheet. So I'll choose the third option, which is net and cost worksheet, which will open up the net and the cost worksheet of that particular item simultaneously or together, and you can align it to fit the screen, or you can adjust it to fit the screen. Now by default, the cost worksheet will be identical to the net worksheet unless the user makes any changes within it. The actual productivities, usage of resources, etc. can be updated within the cost worksheet. And also note that any updates done in the cost rate of resources will also be reflected within the cost worksheet. Let's take the example of site clearance. For this item, the estimator has assumed a productivity of 720 meters squared in half day. Let's assume that due to actual site conditions, the achieved productivity is only 650 meters squared in half day. This means for executing the work, we'll have to spend more, obviously resulting in higher cost for the remaining works. This scenario can be reflected in Candy Cost and Allowable by adjusting the cost worksheets. Do note that the updating of rates should only be done in the cost worksheets and not in the net worksheets. If you update in the net worksheet, your budget is going to be affected. Now to prevent any updation in the net worksheets, Candy has the feature to log the net worksheets. As you can see, I have logged the net worksheets, so which will prevent from any input into the net worksheets. To see the option of logging the net worksheet from the price code net worksheets, if we go to edit, you'll get the option to log all net worksheets with a password, which will ensure that there is no updation by mistake on the net worksheets. So in this cost worksheet of this item, I'll change the productivity from 720 to 650 in half day. Which will change the cost rate of this item to 4.407, whereas the budgeted rate is only 3.979 per meter square. I'll store the worksheet, and when I come back to the document 6.1, which is bill with cost rate cost worksheet adjustments, we can see that the cost to completion amount for this item is increased to 3569.70, whereas the net amount for the remaining quantity is only 3222.65. This is again a negative scenario where the productivity reduces, but this tool can also be used for reflecting positive scenarios where the productivity is higher, resulting in savings or reduction in the cost rates and forecast cost to completion. Now let's see the effect of this cost worksheet update on the forecast cost to completion. So I'll close this document, go to the document 1.1, which is cost and allowable by period. Now as you can see, the remaining allowable remains same as 6149890, but the remaining cost has increased to 6184175, resulting in a remaining variance of minus 34285. When we drill down, we can see that there are variances on the clear site activity, which is of course due to the reduced productivity that we update in the cost worksheet. Subsequently, the cost at completion is also updated, which is calculated based on cost to date plus remaining cost. Let's move to the next topic, which is cost to complete adjustments using Subcontract Manager. Forecasting the cost to completion for subcontract works has been simplified by the use of Subcontract Manager application in Candy. In most cases, the awarded rate or quantity of the subcontractor will be different than the budgeted rate or quantity. These will also influence the cost to completion. The subcontract packages can be managed in the Subcontract Manager during the execution or the post-contract stage. So as you can see in this job, there are a few subcontract packages which are included. So if I go to the activities, and if I go to the activity of rainwater goods, you can see that it is priced using a domestic resident subcontractor, and the remaining allowable is 51,326. As you can see, the remaining cost is also 51,326. Now going to the Subcontract Manager in Candy, go to the, I've created a package for rainwater goods, and as you can see in the Subcontract Manager, you can choose what is the net worksheet cost code. In this case, we have chosen domestic residence subcontractor, and if the job is awarded to a different subcontractor, then with a different cost code, that can also be chosen as the subcontract cost code. This can be done from the Subcontract Manager. Now let's see the subcontract bill for this package. So I'll select the subcontract package, click on Subcontract Bill tab at the bottom, which will open up the bill of this package. Now as you can see, the awarded rate and the quantity is updated, and the awarded amount is 42,840, which is different than the budget that we have. Now to see this variance between your budget, I can go to a document 1.2 from the Subcontract Document Manager. Document 1.2, which is the subcontract variance bill. In this case, for the comparison purpose, I have imported the BOQ rate into the comparison rate column, and you can see the budgeted amount is 51,325.95, whereas the awarded amount is only 42840 with a resulting in a positive variance of 8485.95. Now going back to the cost and allowable by period document, from the cost and allowables document manager, going to the same activity or task of rainwater goods. Now here, as you can see, the allowable remaining and cost remaining is the same at 51,326, since the default setting is to use the net rate as cost rates. This can be changed from the cost and allowable setting, which can be accessed from under tools of this document, cost and allowable by period. So if I click on tools, I'll see the cost and allowable setting, and from here I can choose under the advanced calculation options, I can choose the option cost for subcontract items from Subcontract Manager. So I'll take the option, click OK, and then let us go to the same activity, which is rainwater goods. And now, as you can see, the remaining allowable is 51,326, but the remaining cost has reduced to 42840, showing a positive variance of 8486, which is in line with the Subcontract Manager. Now in this document, cost and allowable period, I have chosen not to display the decimal places, but if you want to see the decimal places within this document, you can go to view and choose to show the decimal places or untick don't show decimal places, which will display the decimals also in this document. So you can see the decimal places for the variances also. I'll change this to don't show decimals. So we have seen the three methods by which the cost to completion can be updated in Candy using the cost rate function. So let's move to the next topic, which is cost at completion. As explained in the introduction, the cost at completion is cost to date plus cost remaining. The cost remaining is also called cost to completion. So the cost to completion updated using the three methods seen before will be reflected in the cost at completion also. So as you can see in this document, cost and allowable by period, the cost at completion is calculated based on cost to date plus the remaining cost. Let's go to the next topic, which is cost to complete or cost at completion in end value graph. The cost at completion and cost remaining can also be plotted in the end value graph in Candy after doing the necessary setup, including the baseline. The details of doing the end value management using Candy is not covered in this webinar, but will be handled in a separate webinar in the future. So for seeing the end value graph, you can go to the document 1.1 in the cost and allowables document manager. And for seeing the graph, there is a tab at the bottom of this document 1.1 where you can see the end value graph. So when we click on that graph, it will open up the end value curve, provided the necessary setup for the baseline, etc. is done. So in this graph, as you can see, towards the top left hand side, you can see the data values. We'll see the baseline, then the allowable, which is the budget, and the cost, which is imported for the first period, and then for the remaining periods it will be the forecasted cost to completion, and it will also show the indices, the cost index, the performance index, and also the variances in terms of cost variance and the schedule performance variance. And towards the right hand side you can see the end value curve with the indices also plotted on a graph. So if I just minimize this graph, as you can see, for the first period, which is highlighted in yellow, it is the to date allowable and the to date cost, which is imported from Bellsmart. For the remaining period, it will be the cost to completion, and for the last period, it will be the cost at completion. So as you can see, for this job, the allowable at completion is 6277459, which is the same value that you see in this document as at completion allowable, and the anticipated cost at completion is 6.3 million, which is the same value that we see in this cost and allowable document as also, with a variance of 997 as the at completion variance. So for this graph, as default, I have chosen the terminology as cost and allowable terminology. But if you want to see it in terms of end value terminology, you can also choose the required terminology, which will say that the planned value, end value, and the actual cost. So the end value graph can either be plotted for the entire job, or it can also be plotted for a particular line or particular activity. And this option you can take from the arrow which is next to the graph. So if you click on that arrow, you'll have the option to plot the whole graph or plot for the current line. So I'll choose the clear site activity and I'll plot the graph for the current line. I'll just minimize it to show both the screen. So if you go to clear site, the allowable at completion is 32823. That is the same value that you see in the last period, and the completion cost or the cost at completion is 34104 with a variance of -1281. That's the value that you see in the cost and allowable document also. So the end value graph can be plotted for the entire job or for each line or each activity. So the cost at completion can be seen in the end value curve also. Let's move to the next topic, which is analysis using cost rate. Another practical use of cost rate function is for doing some what if analysis. For example, if we want to find what would be the effect of negotiating a discounted rate for a particular package or a particular resource rate from a supplier on the cost to completion, the cost rate function can be used. This will be useful to find the best option to minimize the negative variance or maximize the positive variance in cost at completion. To demonstrate this, I've got the valuation 2 of the same job with the cost imported. Let me open up the valuation 2 job. In this job, I also introduced some factors that will affect the allowable or the budget at completion. And the first one is the variations. So I've priced one variation within this job. So for seeing the variation, I'll go to the valuations module from the valuations document manager. I'll open up the document 3.1, which is variation order pricing. So in this, at the end of the bill, I have added an item for variation, which is additional area to be cleared. This clear side north boundary, which is around 1000 square meters. I price the item using the same price code. So the rate is same as 3.979. And I've assigned a variation order code. And the status by default is unapproved. Let us assume that this variation is approved by the client. So I'll change the status from unapproved to approved by double clicking on that approval status column. The variations can be reflected in the cost and allowable document by choosing the appropriate option. This can be seen from the cost and allowable module. I'll go to the cost and allowable module. From the cost and allowable document manager, I'll choose the document 1.1, which is cost and allowable by period. Now in this job, I've done the second valuation where I updated the progress quantities, which generates the to date allowable. I also updated the to date cost from Bill Smart. Now the remaining allowable for this job is 5651, 562, and the remaining or the cost to completion is 5689211, showing a negative variance of minus 37649. Now in order to include the variations also in the allowable, I can go to the cost and allowable settings, which can be taken from tools, cost and allowable settings. This under options, you'll see three options with regards to the allowables. The first one is show only the original bill items as allowable or budget. The next one is original bill items and approved VOs. And the third option is original bill items and all VOs, whether approved or unapproved. So in this case, let me choose the second option, which is to show the original bill items and approved VOs in the allowables or the budget. So when I click on that second option and if I click OK, now you can see that the allowable changes to 5655540, and at the bottom of this document you can see that the allowable comprise original bill items and approved VOs, and the variance reduces to minus 33670. By default, the remaining cost will include the variations also, because you will incur the cost for those variations, obviously. So this is one factor which could change the remaining allowable or the allowable at completion. Another factor that will affect the budget is escalation, if applicable on your contract. In Candy, the escalation factors can be assigned against cost codes, which can be done from the definition and settings. Under the definition setting under 4.1, which is the cost code or the ledger code definitions. Against each cost code, you can update the escalation percentage, where you can update a separate percentage for the to date and a separate percentage for the to completion period. To demonstrate this, let me go to the cost code of steel bars and let me update a to completion with escalation factor of 10% on steel bars. Now this escalation can be reflected in the allowables by choosing a different document within the cost and allowables by period. So after applying this 10%, let me go to the cost and allowable document and choose the cost and allowable document manager. And if I go to new document, in the second heading, there is a document which is 2.4, which will show the allowables and escalated allowables by period. I've already added to the list, so I'll open up the document 2.4, which is allowables and escalated allowables by period. So within this document, you can see the escalated allowable and the original allowable for each period. Let me do a grouping based on, let me group it based on the course code and task code. And if I just close it, and let me go to the steel bars where we applied the escalation factor. Now, as you can see, for the steel bars, there is a change in the escalated allowable in comparison to the original allowable due to the 10% escalation that we applied. And you can see the variances between the escalated allowable and the original allowable. So these are the two factors which could affect the allowables or the budget. The topic of escalation was covered in detail during a previous webinar last year. If you need to get the recording of any previous webinar, please contact the local CCS office. This will also be posted in our new website very soon. Now let's continue with the analysis using cost rates. So going back to the cost and allowable by period document 1.1. So in this case, I have only included the variations within the allowable. I have not considered the escalation factor. So as I said, for this job, there is a to-date variance between the allowable and the cost which came from BuildSmart. There is a variance of minus 62591. But the variance at completion is 96261, caused by a remaining variance of minus 33670. As a QS, I am doing some analysis to minimize the negative variance. As you can see, for the clear side, there are some variances. There are some major variances within the internal plan hire for the excavation activity and also on the cement cost code within the concreting activity. So one option which I can do to minimize is to negotiate the resource rate with the supplier. So let me go to the document 7.1, which is resource cost rate to completion. So let me do a filter for the symbol resource again. I'll go to view, filter and choose resources that are symbols. And I'll do another filter to show only the plant related resources based on the resource type of plant. So I'll keep my cursor on the resource type. Within that filter toolbar, I'll click apply filter on the current column, which is the resource type. I'll choose to display only the plant related resource type, which will filter out everything and display only the plant related resource type. Now let me do a sorting based on the value on the remaining quantity amount. I'll sort in the descending order of the value. So as you can see, the major resource within the plant resource type is JD 4 digger loader with a hourly rate of 195 per hour. Now if I can negotiate with the supplier of this plant, and let's assume that he offered to give a discounted rate of 180 per hour. So I'll update that 180 per hour as a cost rate of this resource. So now as you can see, based on the cost rate update, the remaining quantity cost amount reduces to 487598, whereas the remaining quantity usage amount is, or the budget for the remaining quantity is 528231.26. Now let's see the effect of this on the remaining cost and cost at completion. Let's go back to the cost and allowable by period and let's click on calculate. When you click on calculate, you can see that the remaining variance has reduced from minus 33,000 to minus 6,854. And similarly, the variance at completion has also reduced since we got a discounted rate on the plan. Similar analysis can also be done within the cost worksheets by changing the productivity, waste factors, etc. To demonstrate this, let me go to the document 6.1, which is bill with cost rate for cost worksheet adjustment. Let me group this bill document based on the activities. I'll go to view, group by, based on task codes, and let me close to the main task, the heading level, and let me go to the activity concrete foundations. Within the concrete foundations, there's an item C20 concrete foundations, which has a major variance of minus 28722.77. Let me open up the worksheet of this, the net and cost worksheet. So as you can see, for this item, the estimator has assumed a waste factor of 7.5%. Now let's do an analysis by adjusting the waste factor to 5% in the cost worksheet. So let me update the cost worksheet with a waste factor of 5% instead of 7.5%, which was originally assumed by the estimator. I'll store the worksheet. And let me go to the cost and allowable by period document and click on calculate. Now you can see that the remaining variance has become positive now at positive 22260 due to the reduction in the remaining cost due to the adjustment in the cost rate and the cost worksheet. So the variance at completion has also reduced to minus 40,000. So if these scenarios can be achieved, it can reduce the variance at completion by almost 40 to 50%. So the tools available in Candy can be used to forecast the cost to completion and cost at completion effectively, not to maximize the profitability of a construction project. This brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you for your time, and I trust that now you have a greater insight into Candy's functionality of forecasting cost to completion. Please remember to email your local CCS office if you want to know more about this topic. We'll keep you informed on the next webinar. And remember, if you are unable to join on the selected time, then please still register and you will receive the recording, which you can then watch in your own time. Enjoy the rest of your day and goodbye for now.